Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to go over the Bmad method and how you can use it on existing repos. As you can see here, I kind of have a repo already here in place where it's a ZBrain connector microservice, and we want to add an HTTP connector for an HTTP connector endpoint for ZBrain. So typically with any project like this, you want to document what is already in the repo. If you're not sure which commands to use, often I recommend to people to use Bmad help, and you can say, hey, I'm trying to add a new feature to this repo, what should my next steps be? I am, and we hit enter. As you can see, it's kind of planning what the next steps are. Then it's going to give you recommendations of the commands that we should be considering to use. And as you can see, it's kind of given some documentation, but instead, I want to actually walk you through the official one. But just so you're aware that that option is there to kind of use Bmad help. But the first thing you want to kind of do with any project you want to do work on, you first want to document what all actually is in the project. So you can kind of see here, there's a Bmad document project. If we go ahead and kick that off, it is going to actually help us scan the entire repo and determine what all it is and what all is inside of it. As you can see here, I'm going to make a little bit more space. So you can see here, it's kind of asking what level of scanning you want to do. If it's like a small repo, you could probably do a quick scan. But this is a production enterprise application, so I actually want to do exhaustive scan. So I'm going to tell it 3 and then hit enter, and it's going to do an exhaustive scan of the entire application and then document exactly what all is there. So as you can see, it's grepping through all the files, and this can probably take a good, I don't know, anywhere from 5 minutes to 2 hours, all kind of depending on the size of the application. So we're going to let this run, and I'll come back to you in a second. So as you see, it's kind of determined roughly what the application is. It's asking me some questions here. Hey, it kind of gave me some overall what it thinks the application is. Then just I can press C to continue to the next step, hit enter. But this process, all this really is, it's building documentation under the docs directory of exactly what all is in this application, so that when you go to add features, it doesn't hallucinate or try and add modules that you already have or create things that aren't needed. So that's the whole point of this process, is to deeply document what all is in this repo so it knows exactly how to add new features. Now you can see it's asking me if there's any additional documentation that I have that's outside of this, and it's kind of asking me to kind of put that in there, but I don't really have any additional stuff, so I'm just going to go, I don't have any additional documentation to add. I can spell. Let that run for a minute. And it's thinking through it. You can kind of see here it's identifying what the technology stack is. It's looking at the architecture patterns. It's getting how everything's integrated, how the APIs work. It's grabbing database schema, how various things work. One thing to kind of note, if this is an enormous application, say it's, I don't know, 20 or 30 gigs or something, instead of you doing a document of the entire application, you just want to work in a certain section, you can specify in that command that we did to document project, you can specify that you just want to work on a particular module. So it doesn't take, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours on something that's enormous. You can just say, hey, I just want to work on a particular module. So when you would do that command, that document project, you can be like, I want to document whatever, maybe it'd be module 15 or whatever the thing is that you're trying to do. As this continues to, I'm going to go ahead and pause for a second while it continues to document out. So it looks like it's finished, and it's created quite a bit of documentation. As you can see, here's a expand and collapse this documents directory. Let's go ahead and keep all of them. You can see there's kind of an index. If I right click on this, go open preview, I'll be able to see what all it created. So it has a project overview file. You can go into that and it'll go over all the things inside of it. Or we can go into its API contracts, how it handles all of that. Or we can go into various other parts. As you can see, it's kind of taken its time and really documented out exactly how everything works. Let's see what other things are in here. Data models. As you can see, documents this out so when you go to add a new feature, it's not going to hallucinate. So now that the AI has kind of documented what all is in this repository and how it works, we want to start a new chat. Yes, I could kind of call the next steps from here, but as you can see, if I hover over this, I'm using 37% of my context. It's better to kind of go through each of these steps with a new fresh chat. So as you see right here, we kind of had our previous one where we documented out. My next chat, I am going to actually ask it to help me create a PRD. A PRD is kind of like the product requirement document. It kind of helps it look at not only your previous documentation, but also define what you want to build. So let's go Bmad, let me go create PRD, and then go ahead and kick that off. You can see it kind of finally finished this, and then it says, hey, do we have any additional information? Let's actually go ahead and tell it, hey, we actually did some documentation. As you can see, all this documentation here. So we go one, use project docs from docs. So it'll go ahead and grab all the information about the existing repository or the existing code that we can add to it. As you can see here, it's identified that this is a brownfield project, and I'm going to tell it actually had written what I wanted to work on. Continue my so as you can see, after I told it to continue, it said, hey, I noticed there's a brownfield project. Let's pin out exactly what you want to do and change to the system. From the project documents and notes, here's my current picture. It actually noticed I had this thing open, and what I wanted to add, I didn't realize it would do that, which is kind of amazing. But I'm going to confirm I want to continue and build a PRD for my objective, which is to tell it what I'm trying to actually do. Just gonna paste it in there so I don't have to type all that. And let's let it run. Just documenting out kind of what the product vision is of what I'm looking to add. And it's kind of defining, hey, what all the features are, what success looks like, why it matters. As you can see, it's kind of asking me what success looks like. So I'm going to say, hey, I'm actually just going to steal what it said right here because it's actually correct. That I just want claims to stay in sync with ZBrain without having to do manual steps. So we don't have to manually pull. Let's let that run. And it's kind of coming back to me and kind of validating or verifying what I want. Going ahead and continue. Yes, that's what I would like. And as you can see, it's asking me additional questions, but just for the sake of the video, I'm just going to continue and just kind of accept the defaults. So even though you kind of see me skipping through these kind of fairly quickly, it's just for demonstration purposes. But when you actually go through this, you should actually take the time to read through these and actually validate it's actually going down the path that you like. Because sometimes it's making assumptions because it doesn't have a full understanding of what you're trying to accomplish, or it doesn't fully understand your vision. So sometimes it will make it assumptions and kind of ask you, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Can you please verify? That's kind of where you would kind of tell it in this chat, yes or no, etc. But for the sake of this video, I'm just pressing C to continue for now. So after several rounds of it kind of asking me questions and me kind of clarifying what I wanted, finally, I could go ahead and press keep, because it's created me a PRD. If you kind of see over here, you see there's an output.bmad. You can actually right click on this, go open preview. We can actually see the document it generated. And move this over, just so we can see this saying this is a PRD, this is a brownfield edition, exactly what I'm trying to build, what it's classified as. Some of this stuff is kind of inaccurate just because I kind of skipped through it quickly. I didn't really answer the question, just kind of YOLO'd it basically, just for video purposes. But it kind of talks about the user journey, kind of, it's reading from the technical documentation here to kind of help define the documents that should, or the documentation that should be here. And it references exactly how it works. And then things that should be in scope and out of scope, things that are part of the MVP, must-haves, phase twos, things that are potential risks, things that are functional requirements, non-functional requirements, etc. As you can see, it's quite a long document. That thing is what? Over 300 lines over just, hey, I want to add this feature. So after we've kind of created our PRD, our next step is to actually document the architecture that it's going to use to create this new feature. Because yes, we've told it about what exactly its current architecture is, but we need to have it help define what architecture may be used for this new feature. Say this is some new feature that's using completely new technology that isn't already in our repo. That's what kind of our next steps are. So usually your steps are, you create your PRD, you create your documentation of your existing repo, you create a PRD, you create an architecture document, then you create your stories, then you have it develop your stories. So let's go ahead and start another chat. So we can go to the next step, which will be to create the architecture for the new module or new feature we want to add. So let's create architecture. So that's going to capture our PRD information and all the existing documentation to make sure it fully has documented out all the things that it needs for when it starts to create the stories that it hands off to the developer agent. So as we've asked it to kind of create the architecture, it is using our existing PRD, kind of giving reference to it right there. That is the correct PRD. And let's go ahead and continue. And as like I said, I created architecture under a new chat window, so it's got a fresh context window. All this is kind of thinking. I was just going to show you kind of overall how the process kind of works. So this is kind of like for new, but as you kind of saw earlier, we kind of created the project brief. Just before this, normally if it was a new project, you do research or brainstorm, but we did documented out, here, let me pull it up. So it looks a bit better. We documented out the current code. Why is this looking weird? We documented out the existing code with document projects. Then after that, we created a PRD. Then after that, if you have concerns about it, I normally skip this step, but you can validate your PRD or you can edit it, whatever that may be. But these, I don't really do that much. I normally go straight to the architecture, where it creates the architecture document, which you kind of see it doing now. It's going to ask me some questions about the architecture, and I can respond to those here, but just for the sake of the video, I'm just going to continue. But you do want to read through this and validate it's actually doing what you would like and going down the correct path. Back to what I was saying, as we kind of did here, we did document the code, create the PRD, create architecture. There's a diagram here that kind of shows the create PRD. The create PRD. You can also do a UI UX. That's another command out there, but here we have the create architecture, create stories, and create check readiness. And we'll kind of go over all the rest of the commands, but here's an image to kind of show you what that process looks like. There's a separate process. If you're doing something like a quick bug fix and you don't want to go through all of this process and it's just something small, there is a quick spec and quick dev that I'll go over later, which is a lot quicker. But this will sometimes miss things if you're doing like a really big module or some really big feature that you're adding. You want to make sure it doesn't get anything wrong. That you want to kind of stick to this top process if it's like a medium or big change. It's like a small, quick like bug fix. Once again, you can do quick flow. So as this bot is kind of going through, it's referencing our previous documentation and ensuring the architecture that we use, the document that it's writing, grabs the pieces that it needs from this. So instead of you feeding all of this documentation to the AI for what you want to do next, it's grabbing the pieces that it needs for the module or for the PRD that we want to create. So this was the PRD of what we wanted to do. And sometimes it doesn't need to know all of those things. So that's part of the architecture document, is it's grabbing out the pieces that it needs out of the documentation that we've created, and then creating documentation for the things that we don't have built yet or we want to have added. So after several back and forth of it asking me questions, it's now created an architecture document. So you can see, let me move my thing. You can see this is probably 2 or 3 times longer than our PRD, where it's actually going into even more detail of exactly the hooks, how everything's going to be used, how the API responses are going to be used, how the logging works, the patterns, the file structure, the boundaries, the requirements, and has testing, validation, all that stuff is inside of that. So now also you can see, hey, we go ahead and keep this file. It's telling, hey, your next steps are to actually, you can do a readiness check, or you can go ahead and skip to, your next step is actually create epics and stories. Make this one a little bit bigger. So it's actually going to turn these 2 documents, the PRD and the architecture, into actual plan. So let's actually, we can steal this here, start a new chat. So let's go ahead and kick this off. Of Bmad, create epics and stories. So as you can see, it's reading through the PRD, the architecture, and the other documents that we've created. So you can see here, it's writing out the main epics that we're going to have. And now after it's created the epics, you kind of see that it's jittering the stories for all 5 epics. As you can see now, it's finished creating all the epics and stories. We can go take a look at it here, right-click preview. Just make a little bit more space so we can read it. So it goes over the epic lists and the stories. As you can see here, let's go ahead and keep that. So let me kind of go back to that list of things, of the steps. So we've created a PRD, we've documented the code, we've created a PRD, kind of skipped these. We created an architecture, and we created epics and stories. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to validate. So sometimes AI hallucinates, we all know that. So that's why we always do a secondary step of checking it. So what this next step of checking implementation readiness is, it's looking at the stories and the architecture and the PRD and seeing if there's any misalignment, or if there's something that you said that you want to do in the PRD that it didn't quite cover in the epics and stories. So that's kind of our next step. So once again, we've created PRD, architecture, and epics and stories. We're going to create another new chat, and we're going to do Bmad check readiness. Oops. We're going to do Bmad check readiness. There it is. I scroll past it, check implementation readiness and hit enter. Let's make it a little bit bigger. So this is going to validate, once again, our PRD versus our epics versus our architecture, and also against all of our existing documentation to see if there's any misalignment. And it's telling me here that there's no issues found. I'm sorry, the issues found, no duplicate formats, and missing documents. We don't really have a UX design for this, so I'm not really worried about this part. It was just saying if you're adding something that has a UI UX, we should probably add that. But let's go ahead and continue the file validation. So you can see we've kind of finished that step, and if you actually go over to implementation readiness, go preview, and go look at that, and it'll actually give you a full report on things that are in alignment, misalignment, etc. Back to our steps, we've kind of done our check readiness. So next would be our sprint planning. So think of this as kind of like kicking off a document that's going to keep track of your different sprints, and kind of like almost like a scrum master in a sense. It will kind of keep track of everything. I don't know why it's maybe sprint planning. Go ahead and kick that off. As you see, once again, I'm doing it in a new chat window. So as you can see here, it's parsing epics and extracting the work for each one, and building the sprint status structure, and applying intelligent applying intelligent status detection, generate sprint status file, and validation reports. So it's now completed it. There's a YAML file that it uses now to kind of keep track of the sprints, planning artifacts, implementation. So you'll see like this YAML file, and it's kind of keeping track of everything. So let's go ahead and keep that. And let's go back to our commands again. So we've done our readiness, we've done sprint planning. Now let's go create our first story for our development agent to use. So once again, let's do a new chat. I don't know why it's doing that, but Bmad creates using down arrow, create sprint. Create story. And let's go ahead and do that. So it's going to look at the documentation and everything that we've kind of generated and go ahead and develop story 1.1. So you see here it's adding changes to this YAML file that we talked about previously. So you see it's going to create a story file, add developer context from the architecture documentation, add file structure, and update the sprint status once it's done writing that document. So you can see now it's kind of gone through that, and if we look here on the left side under Bmad output, you'll see implementation artifacts, and you'll see our story 1.1 there, where it talks about the story, acceptance criteria, the tasks, and once we go to the next step where it's going to actually develop, it'll check off these boxes as it completes these particular tasks. And then it's going to update that YAML file as well. It has testing requirements and a bunch of other information. Let's go ahead and keep this file. And let's go back to our documentation where we have our next steps. So we've created a story. So our next thing would be to develop a story. So another fresh chat window. Let's do Bmad. Let's go down to dev. Maybe dev story, not dev, but dev story. Dev story. The other one that we saw, dev, is just like to be able to talk to the developer, but like this one's actually telling the dev to go ahead and go to story 1.1 and go ahead and develop this story and actually write the code for it. So you can, as you can see here, it's developing, it's adding the callback route, it's adding the route for responding, and it's basically writing the code. It's creating the matter.js, index.js. It's making modifications to each of those based on the sprint and the documentation. As you can see, it's written the code. Now it's doing testing to verify that things work correctly. So here I can see that the test passed, and moving on to the next section. You can see here it's updating the markdown file that we had for story 1.1. We're added check marks for the things that are completed. So now it's completed coding all of that stuff. It says, hey, what was done, the tasks that it was done, the test that was ran, the acceptance criteria, how to run the new tests, and then it tells you, hey, you want to go see what the status is, you can go look at that YAML file, but we can also go look at that markdown file. So if we go to that implementation, sorry, not implementation, if we go to story 1.1, open preview, let me go ahead and keep all, you can kind of see it checked all the boxes. Let me scroll up. You see it checked all the boxes for the tasks that it completed, added development notes, and added the testing criteria and kind of completion status, the change log, and kind of things that were done. So now at this point, we can choose to do one of two things. We can choose to, let me pull up the commands. We can choose to do a code review, which is kind of like a QA to see if there's anything strange or anything acted weird. But if you kind of do your test and then you confirm when you push your code that everything works correctly, you can kind of go ahead and tell it now, hey, I would like to go ahead and do the next story. So remember how before when we looked at our planning artifacts or epics, there was lots of stories. There was, let's see, there's 5 epics, and in epic 1 there's 2 stories. So we would probably want next to do our story 1.2. So we would tell it, go ahead and let's write the story for 1.2. So we've developed that story 1.1. So let's go ahead and say, hey, let's go ahead and create story for 1.2. So we can actually have to do it in a new chat. So let's do Bmad. Oops. Why can't I type Bmad develop story? Was there like create story? So create story 1.2. As you can see, it's going to start creating story 1.2. As you can see, it's loading the sprint status from our YAML file, so it knows where we left off and what things need to be done next. So as you can see here, it's writing the story and all that stuff. So as you can see, it's developed story 1.2. We can see it over here, where it actually created this story. Then it also updated that YAML file where it's created it, that's ready for development. So we can now develop story 1.2. So we can go to the chat and go Bmad dev story, and it will start programming and doing story 1.2. And as you can see, you would obviously, I'm not going to have all these stories in this video, but remember in this epic how there's several epics and stories. So I don't want to have you guys sit through this as I go through every single story like this. That would be a long video for you guys, but this is how you kind of step through all of it. Then as you finish development of each story, let's go back to the commands. You would do a code review to make sure it actually did things correctly. Then if you wanted further testing, you could actually use the QA automate command and actually build a test suite. There are some other commands. Retrospect is that something that you can kind of use to kind of, honestly, I've never used this command, so I don't really know what to use this for, but supposedly this is how you can do investigation about what you've kind of done in the past and things you could have done better. And these last two I'm going to save for another video. This is kind of something that you use for like a quick bug fix. If you don't have a big feature that you're adding, like if you're doing a big, large or medium-sized change, you do these you do this top set of steps. If you had a large change, you do these steps up top. But if it's a quick bug fix, you can just do /quick spec, tell it what you're trying to fix, and then tell it to do a quick dev, and it's just 2 steps, and then you're done. And that's about it. And there will be documentation on Confluence. If you have any questions, let me know.